Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and we are back with part 2 of the dual C-47 build. Now the structure of this video is going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to be jumping between both kits nearly as much. I'm going to try and concentrate on one kit at a time for a length of the video, and then we'll switch to the other one. And that's just going to, I think that's going to help just make the construction portion of the video, well, that is the whole video, is building out the fuselages of the aircraft and getting them ready for primer. So I think it's just going to help them make a little bit more sense. And additionally, I should be noted that it was about this time, so I was up until pretty much everything in the last video, I was building both of the C-47s together at the same time. So I'd work on one while it was drying, I'd set it aside and start working on the other one. And I got super frustrated with the fuselage of the Trumpeter kit, and so I set it aside for a couple of weeks and I finished the Monogram kit. So as you're watching this, just note that there's about 4.5 weeks difference between when I'm working on the Monogram kit and when I'm working on the Trumpeter kit. And additionally, that means, unfortunately, because I'd gotten so frustrated with it, there are some things that I did not film on the Trumpeter kit, but I'll try and point those out as they come. So right now, jumping into the build itself, I am working on doing cleaning up the seams on the Monogram kit. Now, I had made a conscious decision that I was going to leave the raised panel lines on the Monogram kit. And mainly just because I knew that rescribing them was going to be a huge pain, and I just wasn't in the mood as it was to do that. So I decided I was going to leave it how it was and just kind of let it be. But at this time, I also needed to start thinking about how I wanted to display the Monogram C-47 because like I mentioned before, I was going to do this one in flight. And so I headed out to my garage and grabbed a piece of scrap wood here. And at this point, I'm just kind of measuring out a center point to drill a hole so that I can insert an acrylic dowel here. So pretty straightforward. This is about the extent of my wood crafting skills. So don't really expect much, but yeah, there we go. Got a nice center hole for a 1/4 inch acrylic rod, and that is going to hold up and support the aircraft. Now, I decided that the best way to actually support the aircraft was to drill through the bottom of the fuselage and then have the rod insert and butt up against the floor of the interior. That way that would create the most solid joint, as it were. So here I'm just marking the position on the plastic, and very slowly, I'm going to do this slowly, and just because I don't want to melt the plastic, I want to make sure I'm cutting it and not melting it, because melting it just causes problems and it just makes a mess. Cutting it allows me to actually get a nice clean circle, and that's what I want. So once I've gotten it to a point now where I can just pop it out, and now we have our nice 1/4 inch circle cut into the bottom of the thing, and you can see here that it's a tight fit, but it fits. I do go in and remount the hole just a little bit, just so that it's not quite so tight, and you can see that I think it's a good central position for the airplane, roughly about where, maybe a little bit behind where the center of gravity would be, but I think it looks right. So now we're going to use some of this epoxy putty. This is pretty strong, durable stuff. I mean, more so than just like the regular epoxy putty. So you just mix the two, like the black color and the light gray color, together until you get this nice dark gray mixture, kind of this dark gray blob here. It takes about, a couple minutes to get there. It does give your fingers a workout. And then at this point, what I'm doing is just tracing or marking on the inside, the bottom side of the cabin floor, roughly where the dowel should be going. And I'm just going to place a puck of this putty right there and make sure there's a decent amount on there. I need enough on there just to grip the acrylic rod. So now we reinsert the lower piece of the wings. I'm just going to use a little bit of tape just to secure that in place while we get the rod set, and then now we can go ahead and push that in. So what I'm doing is just pushing it into the epoxy putty, and the epoxy putty will hold that, and Just got to make a few adjustments to make sure that the alignment is where I want it to be. I was going to have this in a pretty neutral position, flying basically straight and level, as it were. And I had considered adding like a little bit of a bank to it, but in the end, I felt that this was the simplest and was going to look the cleanest. So that's set, and it sets pretty quickly. It's pretty fast acting. So once that was set, that I could actually move back on to working on the wings of the aircraft. Now the Monogram kit has this kind of center spar, well, not necessarily center, forward spar, I should say, that doubles as the back wall of the wheel wells. And that's unfortunately the extent of the detail that goes into the wheel wells. They're pretty much just large voids. And if you had this thing sitting on the ground, wheels down, I would consider adding some detail in there. But whereas I was going to have this one in flight and the wheels were going to be retracted up into the wheel wells, you'd be hard pressed to see anything anyway, so I didn't do any detailing there. But you can also see here how that wing spar actually doubles as the landing lights, which is actually kind of convenient. So we can get the wing halves together. Now, for anyone that's built the Monogram C-47/DC3, this kit is notorious for having warped wings, and I don't know how I lucked out, but the wings on these ones were super straight, so I was pretty fortunate. Now, I did manage to snap the front canopy while I was test fitting it, and that's kind of a big bummer. I was really bummed by that, because that kind of a fix is really hard to deal with, and so I just kind of figured, I'm just gonna have to live with it. And the Monogram kit, this is one of the worst parts of the Monogram kit, is trying to get the front canopy fit, because it does not fit correctly. You have to do a lot of trimming, and then even then, once you can get it in, and you have to use the large side windows as your base reference point here, it still has a large overhang at the very front that has to get filled. And I ended up using a whole bunch of Vallejo plastic putty to basically blend in the overhanging portion of the canopy to the rest of the fuselage. And you'll see it a little bit later in the video just how much I ended up using to do that. It's really unfortunate the way Monogram designed this, and this is how they have you do it. They have you put in the canopy after the fact from the outside, and there you can even see like the very center post how much farther it sticks out. Yeah, it's pretty bad. So with the wings all glued or dried and glued, we can actually get them attached to the fuselage. And you'll also notice that I've been doing a lot of priming along the seam lines at the top and bottom seam lines of the fuselage. That's why there's like layers of white and layers of black. I usually alternate between primer colors just so that when I'm sanding, I can kind of see how far down I'm sanding through. Like, oh, I'm sanding through the white primer, I'm sanding through the black primer, down to bare plastic. And there on top, you can really see how I've had to do a lot of seam work, and it felt like every time I do a new layer of primer, there'd be a new seam that was showing. But at this point, I'm ready to mask off the canopies, and fortunately enough, kitmask.com has me covered here. So we're going to go ahead and get these on, and they've done a wonderful job doing the masks for this kit, because everyone fit perfectly. And there again, like I mentioned, you can see all the white around the canopy. That's all Vallejo plastic putty that I basically had to build up layer upon layer to get the canopy to actually fit flush with the rest of the fuselage. Yeah, kind of a mess. Side masks can go on. Again, you can get these masks at kitmask.com, as well as masks for the Trumpeter kit, which you'll see later on in the video. So they have masks for both the Monogram and the Trumpeter kit, and they're specifically designed for each kit. So it's not like they tried to, repurpose one for the other. They're designed perfectly to fit both of the kits individually. Now you'll notice that I mentioned in the last video that I pre-masked off the cargo doors. Well, I managed to stick my thumb through the through the masking tape on the Monogram kit, so I had to make up a new masking thing there for the door. But Yeah, at this point we can just start adding on a lot of the, little miscellaneous parts to the fuselage that the you just need to add on. Here I'm using some liquid chrome to do the landing light. So first I apply the liquid chrome, and I apply it pretty heavily. I want a good solid, disc of chrome in there. And then finally, once that dries, I'm gonna come in with some of the UV curing clear resin to essentially create the lens for the landing light. And pretty happy with how these turned out. It's a simple fix, easy to do. And so once those cured, then I'm going to use the UV resin to attach the landing light covers. Now we're going to come back to these a little bit later, but keep an eye on that. So now we're going to switch over to the Trumpeter. And like I mentioned, we're now about 4.5 weeks later in time. And I had to do a lot of work on the Trumpeter kit. Probably more so than I did on the Monogram kit. Mainly just because I actually had to do all the rescribing, and I had to add in tons of rivets. And it was hard trying to match the rivets from the kit itself. So there was a lot of sanding and filling and sanding and filling and sanding and filling that went into this kit, as well as rescribing. So just be warned. Now, the kit comes with a rudder that is metal covered, and as I understand it, that's accurate for a Russian Lend-Lease C-47, but not a C-47A that took part in the Normandy landings. So fortunately, Quick Boost has a resin rudder that corrects the issue with the kit rudder. And it is fabric covered, like would be, typically seen on a Normandy D-Day C-47. Now, what I was hoping for was basically a drop-in replacement. However, it doesn't quite work out that way. So you do have to remove these two little nubs on each of the tabs here. So the kit has it designed so that you can actually move the rudder, that it's movable once done. So you have to remove those little tabs, and then you have to slot on the rudder onto those tabs. And that's how I thought it was going to go. However, trying to fit it on, it became apparent that the slots are just like 2 millimeters too close together for it to actually fit correctly on the fuselage. And so that was kind of a bummer, to be honest. I was really hoping it would just drop in and would be good to go. But so what I ended up doing is removing the little tabs here, cleaning up the part, and then attaching the tabs directly to the rudder, and then attaching the full rudder to the fuselage. And I found that to be the easiest way to do it and with the least amount of headache. So here we're just going to super glue in the tabs into the rudder, and then get the trim tab installed and its little actuator. It's actually kind of nice that Quick Boost gives you a separate trim tab just in case you wanted to, position the trim tab. You wouldn't have to do any surgery. And then we can get the rudder installed. Now, with the tabs being installed on the actual rudder itself and not the fuselage, trying to get it aligned was a little tricky because there's no positive, here it goes, but got there eventually. So now we can mask up the Trumpeter kit. And again, we have our kit mask set here. And just like on the Monogram kit, these fit flawlessly. The Kevin and Janelle from kitmask.com have done a wonderful job on this. And we're definitely going to be using more of the kit mask products in the next video. So when we finally get to the painting stage of the project, so just be on the lookout there. But if you head on over to kitmask.com, their inventory is growing every day. They're adding new mask sets to their inventory. So highly recommend you check them out. I'm a big fan of supporting small business, mom and pop business, and that's definitely what they are. So they ship internationally. They've got great prices, and it's a good alternative to the other masking companies out there. And so far, they haven't failed me yet. And I've used their stuff on quite a few projects at this point, and I have a lot more projects lined up that I'll be using with them. So sorry for the little plug here, but I'm not sorry because they're worth it. Now, the Trumpeter kit, when it comes to the wheel wells, have gone way above and beyond adding detail. I mean, they've pretty much packed just about every detail you can possibly imagine into the wheel wells. So definitely a highlight of the kit, and it looks really good. Fit-wise, it's a little iffy. It kind of takes a little while to get everything to fit properly, but in the end, it looks really good. Not that necessarily anybody will ever be looking up inside the wheel wells, but they do look really nice. So we've gone ahead and primed them, and now we're going to do a little bit of our, white highlights here, like we did in the interior of the aircraft before we start laying down our main color. So we just want to create, especially because the wheel wells are so dark, I really want to have a lot of areas that really pop with contrast between, the different tones and the shadows and the highlights and things. So that's really what I was going for here. Now with the white layer down, we can start laying on our interior green color. And this is, of course, the Ammo MiG interior green, my favorite. And go ahead and get all these. So what's cool with the Trumpeter kit is pretty much everything in the wheel well is modeled. They give you both the internal firewall for the wheel well as well as the firewall for like behind the engines, and then you get full engines plus mounting plus exhaust, and it's pretty impressive how it looks. Fit wise, again, it's iffy. You really have to test fit to know what you're doing, or to know like how it all goes together, but eventually it does fit together, and it looks the part here. So we're going to add in on a quick wash here, add a little bit of grime and grease and oil and things to the engine, or the wheel wells essentially, and make them look suitably dirty and used. So I had a lot of fun painting the wheel wells here and painting all the details, and really going to town on that. So here you can kind of see the time lapse of how all the components go together for the wheel well. So you get sidewalls, you get you get the front firewall, you get the back wall, you get everything, and it's really cool. You get the little oil tank that sits inside there, and all the little hoses that associate with it, and then eventually we'll show you a little bit later on the way that the actual landing gear units build up themselves are quite complex. So there's a lot going in here. Additionally, you can see that the back end of this component here, the Trumpeter kit allows you to have the flaps positionable, flaps down, flaps up. And normally I'm a huge fan of flaps down if that's an option. But the problem with the Trumpeter kit is there were so many ejector pin markings on the actual flaps themselves, and they're in between little ribs, and they would have just been impossible to remove all of them in a way that would have made me happy. So here you can see I've kind of done some final priming on the fuselage itself just to double check all my seams, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. But now we can move on to kind of finishing assembling the Trumpeter fuselage. So the way that the wings attach to the fuselage is actually pretty good and pretty solid, and you do have to do some test fitting here and trimming just a little bit to make sure that it all sits flush, but honestly it actually fit pretty well here. So we can go ahead and get our glue in and get at least this portion of the build together. This was kind of a good, at this point with the Trumpeter build, I was starting to finally get excited about it again, because I'd kind of gotten past all of the major sanding and filling and all the headache that brought with it, and I was really able to start kind of seeing, okay, I can see where this is going to go. I can kind of see my vision taking shape here. So at this point I was finally starting to get excited about the Trumpeter kit. And another thing you'll notice here is that the wings, you have like the outboard section of the wings and the inboard section of the wings. And what's nice is you can actually leave the outboard sections off to paint them separately. And I find that a little bit easier when it comes to painting around the engine nacelles and getting a nice, good, clean line there. So you can see I did some more sanding here to blend in the wing section with the fuselage section, rescribed, and now we can start adding in our little details here. Trumpeter does provide you with some nice photo etch for the oil coolers. These sit underneath the engines, just in front of the wheel wells. And the photo etch is really a nice touch. I have to compliment Trumpeter on that, they look really nice, and they definitely look the part and help just add like that much more level of detail to the build and to the construction. So these get installed on here just like that, and you can see we've got our firewall in place there at the front, and now we can kind of get all of the rest of the larger components on, and we'll be moving on. So another issue with the Trumpeter kit is that it has the wrong profile for the engine cowls. Again, I think it's because they based their design on a Russian version of the C-47 and not necessarily an Allied version. And so it had the incorrect shaped engine cowls, so I got quick boost resin replacements for that. So here we can see we're just getting the wing put together on the Trumpeter kit, and what's nice is you get separate ailerons, separate flaps, so if you want to have those posed, you can do so. So at this point in the video, we're gonna now go back to jumping back and forth as we work on some of the smaller details. So here I'm just working on the landing gear for the Monogram kit, building up the tail wheel, just a 3-part affair. You have a single piece wheel and then the 2-part strut that holds it. Pretty straightforward. 2-part wheels for the landing gear. These just get glued together, and then eventually I sand them and clean up the seam line. Now I am doing the Monogram kit in flight, so modification needs to be made to the landing gear in order to portray it as in flight. So basically the way the landing gear works is it has like multiple hinge points, and it folds forward up into the wheel well. So I removed the upper half of the main landing gear strut, just because technically that would all be like folded up inside and you wouldn't be able to see it. And then we add the support bracing that goes on the back side of the landing gear strut. Now the connection point for this is really small, and normally the easiest way to do this would be to put the main landing gear strut in the wheel well, and then it'd be easier to install the bracing strut behind it, but that's wasn't going to work out. I also had to drill out the exhaust, so starting with a small pilot hole and then coming in with a larger drill bit. Now the reason why I'm doing this by hand is because using a Dremel or a drill, I didn't want to over rev it for just a second and then drill too far and ruin it. I felt like I had more control doing it by hand, and it took a little bit longer and a little rough on the fingers, but in the end, I'm happy with how it turned out. Now I'm not going to go super detailed in detailing the engine, so I did the detailing for both the Trumpeter and the Monogram kit. I have a separate video on how to do engine wiring, so I'll link that down below in the description of the video. So we're just going to kind of breeze through it, do the really abbreviated version here. Basically, you drill holes in each cylinder, and in the crankcase, you insert wires, bend them over, and there's your ignition wires. Now it's super simple, and you can see here the detail on the Monogram kit is really sketchy at best. So I wasn't necessarily super worried on getting everything perfect and spotless. Just to show that the detail is there, but I was counting on the photo etch pieces that I got to represent the spinning propellers to largely cover up these engines, so you wouldn't really be, staring at them. Now here is the example of the Trumpeter engines. Much nicer, way more detailed. They look really nice. Now here's kind of the breakdown on how I got the Trumpeter landing gear together. Now the Trumpeter landing gear is really complex. I think there's like 12 or 13 parts per side to get the landing gear together, so you really have to be careful and pay attention because a lot of the parts are keyed left and right, so care must be taken. Now the kit does provide you with actual rubber wheels, so you get separate plastic hubs and then the actual rubber tires. Not a huge fan of rubber tires, but they worked overall okay on this. But basically I'm using the wheel well here to align all of the parts for the landing gear while it dries, just to make sure that it's all going to fit correctly. And now on the Trumpeter wings, it's time to work on the landing lights here. Now they have it a little bit differently, where you have like this solid piece as part of the wing, and then you install a landing light into the center of it. I couldn't tell you which is more accurate, the way that Monogram does it or the way that Trumpeter does it. They both have different ways of going about it. So we get the clear part installed, and then we get the cover installed. Now, to Trumpeter's credit, the covers fit almost flawlessly, and they looked really nice, really clear, and pretty happy with those. And fortunately, KitMask does provide masking templates for them, for both the Trumpeter kit and the Monogram kit. Now, going back to the Monogram kit, the landing light covers did not fit at all. And so in order to get them flush with the leading edge of the wing, I had to do a lot of sanding. Now, I understand that sanding clear parts can be pretty nerve-wracking, and especially when it's your first time. And even if it's not your first time, like I still get nervous that first stroke I take, to sand it out. But if you've watched my B1 video, I have a pretty lengthy segment in that video going through sanding, blending, and polishing clear parts. So again, this is the abbreviated version, but essentially start, with a high grit sandpaper, then work your way all the way up to, these polishing pads. And eventually I get to a point where the landing light cover is completely perfectly blended into the leading edge of the wing, and I couldn't be happier. So at the end, we can get the all the dust and grit removed, and there we have our nice clear lens that we can get covered over. And you'll see in the next video, after we get through the painting process, just how nicely those blended in and how nicely they turned out. So very happy with those. Now we can go ahead and start doing a little bit of detail painting on some of the smaller details that we have been working on. So here, just painting up some of the Trumpeter parts here, and then I'll show you some detail painting on the Monogram parts as well. Now the Trumpeter kit has a much different system for the exhaust, and again, I couldn't tell you which is more correct, Monogram or Trumpeter. So I have both of them, and I'll let you guys decide which one looks better. But the just painting the tire here with some acrylic black. This is Vallejo acrylic black, and I'm sure I could have masked off and sprayed the wheel, but honestly, for the most part, I find just hand painting it works just as well, and is usually a lot quicker than masking it off, loading up the airbrush, cleaning the airbrush, and doing all that work. I just like to do it by hand. Here we're going to paint the engines. So these are the engines for the Monogram kit. And again, because the prop blur effect is going to be largely covering the engines, I wasn't too worried about going super detailed on the painting process. So basically we got the gear reduction housing painted. We've got the ignition leads painted. And now we're going to come in and start doing a little bit of panel lining with something. I don't use the Tamiya panel liners very often, but when I need a good solid black for a panel liner, it's the one that I go with. So we're just going to go ahead and get this all over all of our metallic parts here, just to add a nice level, deepness to the details, including the engines. We're gonna be pretty generous on the engines here and get all those details knocked out. So at this point, if you stayed around long enough, thanks for watching. I would like to give a huge shout out to my patrons for supporting the channel and for helping me bring content like this to you. If you're not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel. Like the video, and let me know what you think down below. And I hope you're excited for part 3. So part 3 is pretty much going to be all the painting and then wrapping up the projects. And so, yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye, everyone.